Hey fellas, wanted to show you today about the clearancing the pistons for the valves. I've got this 86 short block flat top that I got from the Chad. Chad lives up in Jay, Florida. He's actually the mayor of that little town. But he was kind enough to give me a bunch of stuff, and one of them was a flat top, 86 short block that was all complete. I put new rings and bearings in it and cleaned it up, and I put it together. I've got a set of old Explorer heads that I ported. I really went kind of overboard because I had the bosses here milled down and then drilled, and then I tapped them for screw-in studs, and there's a bunch of stuff I had on my red car, the rockers and whatnot. So that's going back in the red car. But going back to the cutting the pistons. When I first did it, I tried it using the sandpaper. It's actually not sandpaper. It's a little higher quality sandpaper. It's off of I went to Lowe's and got a belt sander. I think it's like 60 grit or 80 grit. And I cut it out, little circles for the valves. And then I glued the sandpaper to the valve on an old workbench. I took and drilled a hole, put the valve through there, put the glue on it, put the sandpaper on it, and then I put a weight on it so it'd sit overnight. Then the next day I could use them up. And then also made this little collar. So then what I would do, I figured out what I needed just by trial and error. So I put the piston down the hole 1/4 of an inch, measured with a caliper, and then put this collar on, 0.9160 to the collar from the tip. So I measured that, tightened the collar down, or put the valve in the head first, actually, of course. And then you run this down with a drill onto the piston, and it'll cut a nice notch in there. But the only issue with these is it doesn't make a radial, doesn't have any radial clearance. So you've got a notch in the piston, but it's just barely clearing the piston. And of course, when these things start flying, turning the RPMs, they're not going to go straight up and down the way they're supposed to. There's going to be a little movement. So you don't want the piston to hit, outside of the valve to hit outside of the notch. So then I thought, well, I'll try what other people have done. I went to Harbor Freight, got a little 1/4 inch square file, and I cut it out, put it on here, but it loaded up a lot because of the piston material, the aluminum, and it didn't really cut good. So then I thought I might have been on the right track. So I went and got a bigger file from Harbor Freight, and I cut it, so I got the radial clearance on the sides. It's a little clunky because it moves up and down, as it goes around the hitting the piston, because it's going at an angle, so it's kind of moving up and down. But it worked. Got the job done. Not pretty, but it got the job done. There are some companies, I think Iski will rent tools to do this, which is probably does a better job. I intended to show you what it looked like after I got done, but I got on a roll Friday night and I got the heads on. But it looks like a home done fly cut piston. If a caveman used his favorite club and his favorite arrowhead to do it, it's probably pretty close. But no, it's not that bad. But it's, obviously a factory's going to do a better job. And the other thing was, your bolts for your air compressor or your AC compressor and power steering and all that. This one isn't getting that at all. So I went and got some 5/16 threaded rod and got some of these things. They're called whiz nuts, but they got the serrations on the back. So once you tighten it down, it tends to stay tight, which is pretty good because the gaskets kind of release on these things as they get as you get older. And then you start getting leaks. And the other benefit to using these, if you go and give it that last little ug to tighten them up, and all of a sudden it gets loose, you can run the run the threaded rod all the way through and put another nut on the backside, instead of taking everything apart and then trying to put a helicoil in there, like what I probably should do, but I'm not doing that. And finally, oil pump. I see a lot of guys tend to put a high volume oil pump in the car, which is fine. I mean, they work. But I didn't know until a couple years back they sell an M68A that's got that little tag on there. What that is, it's a standard volume, but it's a high pressure oil pump. And those work better, I think, because you don't have the, I mean, you're getting a high volume pump will work. So, but the high pressure one doesn't have the issues of, like, if you run the pump, you can run your oil pan dry using a high volume pump. I don't know how that's possible, but supposedly it has happened. But the high pressure one, because what you're doing, you got a high volume pump, but then you're still trying to push it through all the same little holes. Like here, this is a gasket, but you see on the standard high volume pump, this is your 1/2 inch drill, and this is a 9/16 drill, which will go down in there if you get it the angle just right. But if you open this hole and the hole going here, because what happens is your oil pump picks up the oil from the pan, runs it through here, comes out here into goes through the filter, then goes back through that hole, and then goes in here, and then kind of tees off and goes to the crank, and the other side goes down here. This one, that galley goes to the lifters. And then what that does, it goes down this valley, lifter valley, up over the top here, across the backside, and then down this way. So there's diagrams online that kind of show it a little better. But what I did with this one, this is a block that's going to go on my son's 94 GT. We're just going to put a standard volume high pressure pump in it, but I took this guy here, a Unibit, and I just run it into the one that feeds the main bearings, and did open them up a little bit, not all the way to match the galley, what I've done before, but it just gets more oil into the bearings on your main bearing. And then you get your journals. You got oil galleys in your crank also, so it also feeds a little more oil to the rod bearings without having to put a extra capacity pan and all that stuff that is recommended if you run a high volume pump. High pressure pump works good on an engine like this one here. This is the 86 short block I got from Eric, the Donut Man. I put my twisted wedge heads on it, the ported ones, a Victor Jr. intake with a 4-hole throttle body. That's going to go in the blue car. But the high pressure pump works on these because I'm not taking it apart. I'm just going to go ahead and put a high pressure pump on. The extra pressure comes out from between the rods, and it kind of sprays up here in your onto the bottom of the cam. So that's the benefit of the extra pressure, especially if it's got a bunch of miles on it. Oh, and one other thing, what I always recommend, if you have a block apart, you take and tap these holes here in the front. There's like freeze plugs in there. What you do is get a long rod from like a 5/16 or 3/8 rod from Lowe's, steel rod, costs like $5 or $6. You can take out the threading cap plugs in the back, and then knock out the ones in the front. Sometimes you can drill a hole in them and use a dent puller to pull them out, but the rod always works. So then you tap it, and on this one right back here that feeds you put this little plug in there. It's called a vented plug. They're actually for a big block Chevrolet, but it's got a little hole in there, if you can see that. But That sprays an oil stream right on the distributor gear, right on the back side of the distributor shaft. You can see the number on that thing. But you can buy, like I said, you can buy them at Amazon. I'll put the number up, the link to it online. But it's just stuff to make the engine last longer, especially if you're up there at the track beating on it. And so a little more longevity. You know, the small block Fords always seem to be, what I've seen anyway, they might not make the most power, but the guys are up there beating on them a lot, especially around here by us. You know, our crew has got several of the cars got a couple 100,000 miles on them, and they're still getting after it. So anyway, this is way too long, but if you had I'll post up the links, and hopefully it helps you all out. Later.